this. My volume is too loud. There we go. So you heard it there. The meeting will be recorded and shared later on. Welcome to Redux Fundamentals. So many of you have seen or were here for React Fundamentals. We're sort of taking that next step to Redux. Before we get started, are there any questions on anyone's mind? Yes, of course. We will. Not only will I share the recording, but I'll put it on the student app. By the way, for those of you who are interested, the Cat Tinder series, the React Fundamentals series, is already up now in the student app. If you search for React Fundamentals, or if you search for Cat Tinder, you'll find the collection of those videos. And likewise, we'll have these up soon enough. So it's 6:31. As I say, and many of you have heard me say this, but I can't repeat it enough. As we go, please ask questions. Your questions will make this lecture more valuable, not just to you, but to future listeners, who I guarantee also have similar questions. So no question is too small, no question is dumb. Just because you haven't gotten all the way through the Redux curriculum doesn't mean you're not allowed to ask questions. So please, please, please ask questions. The worst thing I'll say is that's something we'll cover later, or maybe you'll pick something that's not really relevant, or we're not going to deep dive on, or whatever. Or I just don't know. There are lots of things I don't know. In fact, most things I don't know. I'm pretty sure I know very, very little. But I will share everything I can possibly think of that I know regarding Redux with you here in the next couple of days. Cool. So any questions before we get started? All right. Awesome. And as you all know, if you would, please mute your mics if you're not asking questions, but by all means unmute as you ask, or you can ask in the chat. You can even send me private chat messages if you like. Okay, so we're actually going to start off this particular lecture with a slideshow. And a slideshow is going to stay kind of high level. We'll talk about, it's just going to be a discussion. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the slides, but that's where we're going to begin. And I can take literally 0 credit for the slides. I can't even tell you all the people who've contributed to this, but there have been a number. So I take no credit for these slides. They've been prepared by other Flatiron instructors along the way. So Redux, state of the app, very, very nice styling you see here. So before we even jump into the first slide, let's at least try and get a high-level definition, like what in the world is Redux? What is it? Anyone? Let's see, I should pull my chat out so I can see it. There we go. Whoop. All right, now I can see the chat. All right, so Redux is a JavaScript library for doing what?
It manages the state, the global state.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, Kevin, you're both absolutely right. It's a state management tool for global state. So just to be clear too, when it comes to this, I should have mentioned this already, our objectives for these lectures. I'd like to talk about what Redux is and what it isn't, mostly what it is, why we use Redux, and we'll talk about some of the differences. Then we'll focus on Redux within the context of React, and we'll talk about some of the differences therein. What Redux brings to the table that React can't provide by itself. So that's kind of that's our objective today. And either by the end of today's lecture, or at least into tomorrow's lecture, then we will begin a hands-on demonstration of applying Redux to a React application. Okay, cool. So as Kevin and Daniel both mentioned, it's a state management tool. It's a JavaScript state management tool, and it has great docs, as does React, at redux.js.org. You can also learn Redux from one of its authors, Dan Abramov. So learn Redux from Dan. Let's just see what that pops up. There's a full course on egghead.io, which is a really neat resource that you can check out. And there's a full course, I think it's 100 and something hours, where the author himself teaches you Redux within the context of a particular application. So I highly, highly recommend checking out this course as well. Redux Dev Tools, Redux documentation is really nice. So check this out whenever you need some references as well. So let's talk about Redux. Okay, So redux solves a problem. Okay, and this is kind of what we're going to be talking about on these slides. Redux brings a solution to the table for a particular problem. We'll talk about what it is, its principles, and the flow. So what are some problems that we have once our application gets complicated and we have hundreds and thousands of users? What are some issues that we could run into? And really, the answer is actually still sitting in the chat from previously when Daniel answered the question, what is Redux? He wrote state management. Well, one of the problems is state management, right? As we use our applications, we click away, clickety click, clickety click, faster than the speed of light, especially if you've ever seen people under the age of 20. Like, it's amazing. So state is changing constantly, right? Constant. And then Daniel also added passing state from component to component. So within the context of a React application, as state changes, and we build this web, suppose we have 20 components. Now we're passing only one component, remember, owns any given piece of state within a React application. Maybe it's the parent most component, maybe it's not. Maybe it's somewhere else somewhere within your component tree. So somehow we have to decide who owns that state, and then we have to pass it around from one component to another. As props, right? So that's how we get state from one place to another. And it becomes a little bit unwieldy. It can be anyway. So constantly changing state. Everything is connected to everything else, right? So there's no sort of independent components. Everybody needs to know about everything all the time. Well, that's an exaggeration, but something along those lines. By the way, can you see the slides before I go any further? Can you see where it says everything is connected to everything else? Okay, good. Too often I start these without screen sharing, so I'm glad I managed to do that this time. All right, so if we need to make a change somewhere, and we don't tell everybody about it or everything about it right away, I tend to personify React components to everybody. If we don't tell everybody about it, something breaks, right? So there's an issue somewhere. So we're re-rendering, by the way, when we pass props through components that need nothing more than to take that prop and pass it along to someone else, that component re-renders, right? And that's needless re-rendering. So React is doing extra work, needless work, unnecessary re-rendering that is necessary in order for the information to get where it's going. But no changes are happening to those intermediate components, right? That's a problem. And some of you may have seen this image before. Again, I take no credit for it. It's if you search for Redux images, something like this pops up. But this represents the node tree, right? Where the top component here, I could annotate here. I'll get my little arrow out. There we go. Whoops, that didn't seem to work very well. There we go. Arrow, this guy? Nope, maybe not. There we go. So like this guy here might be app, or it might be whatever your top component are. Then it's children, and it's children. And without Redux, these red arrows indicate like changes of state and where information is going and where events are going. And it's this terrible mishmash of stuff, right? So there we go. So our solution is Redux. What does Redux do? Redux allows us to, instead of having state owned by individual components somewhere within the tree of components, somewhere within the virtual DOM, I should say in the tree of components, we're going to extract our state into one place. We're also going to extract very, very precise instructions for how we're going to change state. So we're going to prescribe state changes. We're no longer going to allow willy-nilly anyone who has access to a piece of state to just change it at will, however they see fit. We're going to give them tools to say, okay, here's exactly how you're allowed to change state, and we're going to use pure functions to get there, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So Redux is, first of all, very small. If you've gone through the curriculum already, you've gone through the building Redux section, where you effectively build Redux, right, with a few minor tweaks, a few small differences here and there, but by and large, you build out Redux itself. It's very small. It also represents a design pattern, right? So Redux is not like this brand new idea that came out of nowhere. There are other libraries, other tools that use a very similar pattern. What is that pattern? That pattern really is let's keep state in one place and let's carefully prescribe changes to that state. Okay. Let's use pure functions to make changes to our state, so that the only sort of destructive thing that ever happens is once once we've described and prescribed the ways that we're allowed to make changes, we will give this one function power to actually then make a change, to make a destructive change to our state itself. And so that's kind of the pattern that we're looking at. It makes our changes predictable, right? We're going to prescribe exactly how we're going to make changes. So there will be no ability to just make an assignment somewhere to a piece of state that will throw everything off. And here's a comparison of our previous image without Redux to with Redux. And with Redux, the store represents the global state. And so we extract that out, and now we can literally give any component that needs it. We can use connect to give any particular component anywhere in our entire React application. We can give that component any piece of state it needs and any functionality it needs to be able to change or manipulate state. And that's really powerful. So we're going to use connect, and then we can use map state to props and map dispatch to props to give our components the state that the components need and the tools they need to make changes, to respond to events from the user interface. Any questions up to now about anything I've said until here? I know I've just been talking, just words, but any feedback so far? Okay. So some principles which we've kind of already talked about. Redux gives us a single source of truth. There's no question like, I wonder what the state of this thing is. Redux has it, right? Redux is read only, which means that when we provide all this information, all these tools, we're just giving it to the components. The components themselves are doing nothing. We're going to let Redux itself be the only Redux. When Redux dispatches, that's the only way we're actually going to make changes. We're going to use pure functions, and let's pause on that for just a moment. No, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, I should say. Unidirectional flow. That means that no longer are we going to take like a function, for example, say we have an onClick function that we define in our parent of all parents, an app, and we pass it down 3 levels deep to some component that needs it. We pass the function down, that function calls it back up, and that information is kind of like passed along, back and forth, back and forth. Now Redux, we're going to give the functionality we need only to those components that need it, and we control the flow of information, right? Or I should say Redux sort of takes over the flow of information. So our single source of truth principle, we're going to have a single store. We're going to build that store, which will represent our state, as well as dispatch and all of our reducers. Basically everything that Redux contains, we're going to pack into this thing called a store. The store is an object. In fact, we can see it sometimes, and it is nothing more than an object with a get state method and a dispatch method. And I like the word here. It's the gatekeeper for access and for alterations to state, which we've kind of already mentioned. Whenever you're using Redux, you're going to have one store inside of your particular Redux application. Now, it actually would be possible to like have different Redux stores throughout an app, but I don't know if that's really a good pattern. But for any particular sort of use of Redux, we're going to have one store and one store alone. We're going to wrap all of the components. We're going to wrap the parent-most component in terms of React with the provider component coming from React Redux and pass in the store as a prop, and that's what sort of kicks off the functionality of giving all of our components access to Redux. The read-only principle, state never changes, right? Thank you. No, I appreciate that actually, because I don't want that to happen I don't want that to be part of the, I don't want that to be part of the recording. Thank you very much, Babs. I appreciate that feedback. Is that a little bit better? Please let me know if that continues, because I don't want that to be on the recording. So Babs, thank you very much.
Yes, it's better.
For whatever reason, these earbuds kind of tend to hang a little higher. In fact, I think I can use this to help eliminate that too. Please do let me know if that continues. Is this okay? Can you hear me all right?
Much better.
Much better? Okay, thank you. Again, thank you. Don't ever let me go on with some sort of bothersome noise like that, because that's really annoying, especially when you listen to the playback. Cool. So thank you, Babs. Again, also, let me know if I have something on my face or if, no, I'm just kidding. But seriously. Okay, so we're talking about read-only. So the state never changes, right? We're never making changes to state sort of directly. Instead, the store is alerted of changes. Based on the previous state, we're gonna compare and we're gonna return a brand new state. So like when we say the state never changes, we're basically replacing the state instead of mutating it, right? So never is there a reference that's changed. Instead, we're going to replace state with new copies, right? All the time, whether it's something very small, a single object, or even a single string, or an entire array, whatever the case may be. We're going to make precise changes to that state. The only way to make changes to state will be to dispatch an action. And those things are highlighted because those are important terms. And part of the hard part about learning Redux is all the terminology, right? These words, what in the world do they mean? What's an action? What's a reducer? What is dispatch? What in the world is compose and all these weird things. And so let's talk about these things. Actions. An action is a plain old JavaScript object, we sometimes say POJO, which has to contain what property?
Type.
Type. An action must contain a type property. The second property of a plain old JavaScript object that is a Redux action, the second property represents the new state that's incoming. It could be an array, it could be a single object, it could be a string, it could be any data structure that's represented somewhere within your state tree. And so the action itself simply has a type, which is usually an all caps underscored string, and what's sometimes called a payload. The second property can have any name you want. Sometimes we often refer to it as payload, meaning it's that information that's incoming that's going to change. But it could be anything. You can call it whatever you want to. You can give it a good name that represents the type of thing that it actually is. So here we have a little diagram. What we used to do with React was we used to call functions, right? Callback functions of some sort and call set state. We're not going to do that anymore. Now we're going to dispatch an action, which when we invoke dispatch and pass an action, it triggers invocation of our reducers or our reducer, which then is what actually makes a change in the state. So we get a green star for that one. Pure functions. And here's where we're going to talk about pure functions just a little bit. And some people who vaguely have recollections from math class in high school or college see this and they wince a little bit, like, what is a pure function? What is a pure function? What do we mean by pure function?
One that has no side effects?
No side effects. That is one really important aspect or property, I guess you might say, of a pure function. What is a side effect, Kevin, or anyone?
It doesn't alter any other part of the application.
That's right. That's right. It doesn't alter any other part of the application. Makes no changes, no mutations to incoming arguments or external variables. Makes no API calls. Doesn't even console log. Even console log could be considered a side effect of some sort. So we make no changes. In other words, whatever happens inside of a pure function sort of stays in a pure function. We can expect that when it executes, we don't have to worry about changes anywhere else. Daniel wrote, generates a result only with the inputs it's given. And that's right? That's one way to put it. I like to say it a little bit differently. And this actually this part of it coincides with the definition of a function in mathematics. If you care, you don't have to. You can ignore that if you want, but that's also true. So generates a result only with inputs given. Daniel, can you talk more about that, or can anybody expound on that a little bit?
It's determined by the input values only.
Okay, it's exactly. So we only, which goes back to what we're not using any other or affecting any other data out there. So we're going to stay self-contained. And further, what could we say about, suppose I give the same input to a pure function 100 times. Will I ever see the output change?
We'll always get the same output.
That's right. So the same input like input produces the like output 100% of the time. So we never wonder. In other words, there's no random. If you have a randomizer of some sort inside of a function, it's not a pure function. So we everything is every change, I shouldn't say that, any output represented by a particular input. I'll say it the other way. Sorry. Given the same input every time, we get the same output. That's the rule. And the same thing is true in math for functions. So we get an action telling us how the state should change. Pure functions that utilize pass by reference, which means, in other words, we're not mutating external things that we're passing in. And we're going to use our reducers then to return a new state rather than mutating or changing the existing state. And that's what we mean when we say state never changes. We're not actually mutating state. In other words, we're not mutating whatever references there were to state previous. Instead, we replace them with brand new ones. Reducers. So the reason that reducers are called reducers is they take in information, boil it down to one thing. A given reducer is responsible for updating a particular piece of state. Your application could have one reducer or 100 reducers or anywhere in between. It's up to you. Generally, if we look at our state tree as an object, you're probably going to have a single reducer for each property on your state tree. That's pretty typical. And then you'll use reduxes, combine reducers to put them all together. Typically, a reducer has a switch statement that looks at the type on the incoming action, also receives state, which is, the reducer is going to make a change based on the incoming state. If, for example, it's the very first time that all your reducers are called, it's really, really important that you have what when it comes to the state. So your reducer is going to take two arguments, right? Your action and your state. What's really important about state?
Initial value.
Yes, you must provide an initial value, even if it's just an empty version of whatever data structure, whatever data type you expect your reducer to return, which means, you know, whatever data type that particular piece of state is. Whoops. Sorry if I'm scratching right now. This thing popped off. Okay, I think it's back. Okay, so here we get a little bit of a visualization. We send our current state and our action into a reducer function, which is a pure function, and what's returned is the new state, not an updated. We don't take the current state and like mutate it. That doesn't happen. Instead, we make copies of things. We use the spread operator. We use non-destructive methods, and we change and we return a brand new state. Flow. So there's only sort of one way that this is all going now. We're going to dispatch an action, which fires our reducers. The reducers flow through, and something's going to catch, even if it's just default. And the change of store causes a re-render in the components, only the ones that rely on the piece of state that has changed. And this is a really nice advantage now, this number 4, because no longer are we causing re-renders, 10 times over through components that are simply passing information along that never changed. Instead, we're only going to change the ones that need it. Here we have another visualization. Our component triggers an action. Our action fires a reducer with dispatch. Our reducer fires and returns a new state in the store. Somewhere in here, we could include action creators. Action creators are simply functions that return actions. And later in the lecture, we'll talk about thunk and how we handle asynchronous actions, where actions can be functions rather than just plain JavaScript objects. But we'll look at that in the context of an example. Very common. So if you feel like Redux is challenging and you feel like you're like, man, this is like my brain hurts, then there's kind of a list of common, and I always, some of you have heard me say this if you've heard me talk about Redux before. There's a lot of words here, right? Action creators, action, store, provider, your component, your map state to props, map dispatch to props, that's a mouthful, combine reducers. Why do we have all these capitalized strings, connect, provider, dispatch, all this stuff? What are all these things? And it's kind of like, it almost feels like a vocabulary quiz, right? So you kind of just have to keep playing with it and keep practicing with it. And eventually these things start to have meaning where instead of being a meaningless word that sort of jumbles your brain, it'll start to make sense as you practice. Babs asks an excellent question. How does the API backend change with Redux? The backend API changes with Redux when we import some sort of an asynchronous middleware, and I shouldn't say it that way. We're going to import Thunk. We're going to use Redux Thunk. Redux Thunk is a tool that allows us, instead of having plain old JavaScript objects alone, allows us to have actions that are functions, and we get to then manually dispatch other actions once asynchronous actions have resolved, have finished, once promises have resolved. For example, if we send a fetch request, we're going to take our response, translate to JSON, something readable, and provided that it was a good response, we can, in our second .then, we can then manually dispatch an action. So it's sort of a two-part process where you're going to have an action that's a function. That function automatically is going to get dispatched as an argument, and you'll manually dispatch it. I know that's a lot of words, and it's very kind of, Babs, if it's like, well, you just said a lot of stuff and I didn't see anything, so it's hard to grasp. That's okay. We're going to see an example of that. If not tonight, then definitely tomorrow. So we're gonna connect that kind of thing up, and we're gonna add some Redux. Good question though. Separating concerns, and this particular slide is just like, where does everything live? We have React Redux, which is just what it sounds like. It's the Redux library that is tweaked to deal well with React. We have Redux itself. Redux, by the way, can be used on applications outside of React. You could use Redux on virtually any application. You could have used Redux on your Rails JavaScript project. Absolutely. Like, there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't. You could build your own version of Redux. It's a great pattern. It's a really small, really nice tool that you can use to update and keep track of your state in a really, really nice way. Conventions are going to be use all the caps for your action types, and use action creators rather than describing or defining actions in line. And as you learn Redux, you're going to see different patterns. As concepts are reduced throughout the curriculum, you're going to see different patterns. And they will eventually change as you get near the end, where you'll kind of see things fall into place where we'll no longer be producing actions directly inside of components. In other words, we'll be importing those action creators and using the action creators. Again, these are all levels of abstraction that allow us to have a better handle and more control over what's happening within our state. And this is kind of, it's our glossary. I think that's pretty much the end of this particular slideshow. So this is just kind of like a way to introduce the conversation. Questions? No questions? As someone I work with likes to say, either I'm crystal clear or so confusing that nothing made sense and everyone has given up. Or something, who knows, maybe something in between. We could be shy. It's Tuesday night, who knows, maybe everyone's not pumped yet. Cool. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to sort of start right in with an example. And we kind of have a couple options with our example. We could either start by building a really kind of tiny example within a small application that we could build up, or even just a JavaScript file, or we could jump straight to cat tinder and we could start applying Redux to cat tinder. And I'm kind of open to how the audience is feeling about this. Most of you, many of you have seen cat tinder and therefore are familiar with it. If you haven't, that's okay too. How do we feel about jumping right into cat tinder? Do we feel good about that and kind of thinking about where Redux would make sense within that application? Yes? Okay, Nadia's in. I think within the context of an example is usually the best way to go. And what we're going to do, here's the plan of action. We're going to introduce Redux into this application. Now, a couple of disclaimers. One, it may not be the best pattern to go back and refactor a non-Redux application, a non-Redux React app into Redux, right? Use it straight from the start. Using it straight from the start might make life simpler. But I like the idea of changing one from one way to another, because then you can see the differences. Because a lot of students get confused about, why do I see this in this file and not in that file? And, you know, 2 labs ago, I didn't understand why this was there. Now I see it here. What's going on? So I think highlighting and identifying those differences might be useful for you. That's why I think this is a good way to go. So without further ado, we will do that. And I do have to admit to making some minor changes in the background. First of all, I've added an API. So I now have a Rails application called Cat Tinder Backend. And we'll do a quick, whoops, let's get rid of this. We'll do a quick tour. It's very simple. And this part I'm going to breeze through because it should be familiar to you, but that doesn't mean don't ask questions. Do ask questions, even though right now we're looking at a Rails backend. So what I did, I used a Rails generator. I actually used a scaffold generator to go ahead and fire this up with an API tag and a no test framework tag or flag. I think it's flag. Don't necessarily recommend generators, scaffold generators. They give you a lot of stuff, but I used one to be lazy. So if we look at our controllers, I added cats and users. Actually, we should start with the, I should start with the database. So if we look at the schema, I created a cats table and a users table. For the record, we're not even going to look at users, at least not today. Maybe tomorrow we'll incorporate them. But today we're only going to focus on cats, and we're not going to focus on rating. I added this sort of as an afterthought, but you should remember, if you've seen the previous lectures, status, image URL, and name. Of course, I get my timestamps as well. My seed file will look familiar to any of you who saw the previous application. It is simply the cats JSON file that I had on my front end, translated into a seed file for Rails. So we simply create a cat for each of these things, which gives me a populated database, which is really nice. I have nothing inside of my models. I have no protection, so I could create bad things, which of course is not a good idea, but we can address that later. In my cats controller, I didn't touch this. This is simply generated with my scaffold, but it should look really familiar. All the cats, render JSON cats. Show cats, render JSON cat. All this stuff should look really, really familiar. I've got strong params already incorporated here. This does come with your Rails scaffold generator and set cat. And actually, I don't really mind this generator, because really this should be bread and butter. Like everyone should be looking at this like, yep, I remember this. Anyway, so any questions on this, I'll be happy to address if you have them now. But again, I'd rather get back to my front end. One other really important thing I had to do to make this work was to uncomment rack cores on line 29 here, and to go to my config initializers cores, and I uncommented this chunk of code. It comes commented out like that. And origins localhost 3000, because that's where I'm going to be running my application. I could also use star. I really shouldn't include these guys because I'm not going to be sending options or head requests. Get, post, put, patch. I'm really not even going to use put, but I'll allow get, post, patch, and delete with any header. So I'm okay with this. We should, if we're going to put this into production, if this is going to be more than just like a demo app, we might consider being a little more careful with what requests we're going to allow here. But for now, this will be good. So let's see what that means for us. Oh, I should highlight a couple other changes. I'm going to go ahead and just minimize this for now. So that's my backend. I'm going to go ahead and run that on port 3000. Excuse me, 3001. Whoa. Oh my gosh. Here we go. All right, so that should be up and running, and we can double check that at, I'll leave those up. Well, no, we're not going to use this for now. I'll get rid of the lecture too. So here's my localhost 3001. Let's just make sure it works. It should say, yay, I'm on Rails. And if I go to cats, I should see all my cats. There they are. If I look at cats like number 3, there's Spike. Good, that's good news. So now I've got this guy running. Now I'm going to start my NPM server. Now, I should make this a little bit bigger. Okay, and I'm going to NPM start, and I really should highlight some changes that I have made. These changes are live on GitHub, but let me just give you a quick walkthrough. It'll be easiest to see it if we look at it on the website first. So localhost 3000. A couple things I've done. Hopefully it restarts. That's good news. Maybe. It's thinking about it. It's really thinking about it. Okay. All right, so let's open up our dev tools. Very important that these are open, up and running. And of course, you need to be able to read them. If you can't read something, please let me know. Color, size, or whatever. If my mic starts scratching again, please let me know, all that stuff. So let's see. Some changes I've made. First of all, I've added a form that I can use to upload a cat. And I'll show you what that looks like. Whoops, where's my, that's not how I like this. I want Adam over here. That's better. Okay, so I'll show you the form I added. It is my upload cats form component. It's a class component because it needs state. The state it needs is the form input. I have a handle change to keep my form active. This code should all look familiar if you've gotten through React and you've made some handle changes. And handle submit. This should also look fairly familiar. Here's my form. Starts right here on line 44, ends on line 64. I have simply two inputs, one for name, one for image URL. I've got an on change, which is handle change. That's how I keep track of the state of the input form, the name and the URL. And then I simply have a submit, which has a handle submit. The handle submit takes the event as an argument, prevents default. I build a headers object, which is a post request because I'm creating something. And I fetch to my backend, which is localhost 3001 cats. I include my headers. What am I sending to the backend? I'm sending this object right here. I use json.stringify, and I send that thing along as the body. Babs asks, what is a headers object? So when we send a fetch request, let's look at this. So I'm going to go here. If I type in fetch, standard fetch request, I could simply make a fetch request, http localhost 3001 / cats. Suppose I want to see, I don't know, whoever cat6 is. So I can make this request. If I use my standard.thens, I'm going to r.json. R is what I'm calling the response. And then I'll just console log it. Okay, there it is. Okay, I've sent my request. Now, I don't have to include a headers object. And if we look at our network tab, here's the request I just made. These are the headers, right? I've got my general headers, my response headers, and my request headers. So notice that my request headers, there's not a lot of stuff here. There doesn't have to be for GET requests. This is the preview of the response that I got. If I try to send a post request, I need a way to tell the backend and to tell JavaScript even what I'm doing differently than just a GET request. So fetch defaults, if I don't use headers, fetch defaults to a GET request. So if I go back to my console and I try to run some other type of request, let's maybe send a post request to cats. I have to include an object here, okay? And this is what this object represents my headers. So what does that need to look like? It needs to have a method, for example. And what if I want it to be post? Okay, let's just try that. Bad request, what happened? So it says bad request, exception, action controller, parameters missing, or the value is empty, cat. Okay, so there's a problem here. Basically, my backend is saying, excuse me, you tried to send a post request without the requisite information. It's telling me I need a cat. So I guess I'll try to do that. Okay, we still get a bad request. Now it still says the value is empty cat. And so here I might be getting a little lost. I'm definitely starting to go in the wrong direction. So I might look up fetch requests. I'm going to look for MDN. And so using fetch, MDN, the fetch API, any of these will work. And what I can see here are some examples. And then we see an example of a post method implementation. And so post data, the way that they've built this one is post data they build as a function, right? A function declaration, which means that they can invoke it right away within this example. But my post data contains data, which I have to include. I need my method. Some of this other stuff is required. It just kind of depends on what kind of request you're making, and it depends on your API, what your API is expecting, what the server is expecting that's receiving this request. At the very least, if you're sending anything other than a GET request, you're going to need your method, and you're going to need a body that includes the information that you're sending along. Probably going to need headers as well. And I kind of grabbed, and I kind of said, my headers object is this entire thing. Really, the headers, this is the headers object itself, but I'm kind of calling this entire thing my headers. So really, what I should say is options as well, but I call the whole thing headers. So the one that I built, all I need is a method, my headers to say this is application JSON, and my body, which is the form input. So that's what a headers object is. It's my way of telling my fetch request what I'm doing besides just making a simple GET request. So whether I'm patching, posting, or deleting, I need to include those headers explicitly, or it won't work. By the way, you can use fetch. You can also use like a library such as Axios. We're going to ask you on your final project to avoid jQuery, really just for the practice of building something without jQuery. jQuery, in terms of jQuery, really the only thing that you would be using would be to use get or post or get JSON or something like that. And there are much smaller libraries as well as the inherent fetch API within JavaScript. So there's really just no reason to grab all of jQuery. Not that jQuery is huge. We just want to make sure that our students can send AJAX requests without using JavaScript, or sorry, without using jQuery. We don't want you to be able to do it without using JavaScript, although you could. Okay, so any questions up to now? So I'm just showing you what I've changed. So now I have a form that allows me to create a cat with an image URL and a name. I didn't allow us to set an initial status. I decided just to leave that as undecided. So every cat will start with undecided. And then if we look at the app component, which I've also cleaned up, by the way, notice that I no longer have two separate components for liked and disliked cats. I combined them into just one, which gets a disliked prop that's either true or false. So within my app, I pass along to cats either disliked as true or not. And actually, since I don't pass it along here, it's undefined. I really should be explicit and say disliked equals false. I think that's, and I'm using that to control both the style and sort of whether it's on the whether the cats that are shown are the liked or the disliked cats. And so when we see this thing in action, these are actually the exact same component, like cats and dislike cats. I simply separate. I use different styling and different headers based on whether I'm telling the cats container that it's one or the other. So down the center is our center container has the next up cats down here, these three, the one that we're just deciding on at the top, and I've added the form here in the center. So those are the changes. The functionality is identical. If anyone has seen this before, I can like or dislike cats to my heart's content. I can change my mind about any given cat. If I decide I like Peaches after all and Herman, I can move them over to liked cats. I'm still just getting the cats in kind of whatever order they come in. And I can like or dislike all of them. Now, I don't have persistence set up. So I am fetching my cats on component did mount from the actual API. So they are coming from the backend. However, there's no persistence yet, which is a problem. So I've just made all these changes, but if we refresh the page, we go back to the initial state of the app. I'm just getting all the cats back, and whatever I grabbed initially is what's happening, which is not really the way it should be. Excuse me. So I'm not persisting changes, and further, and actually I have to like all of my cats to see this in action. So just give me a second to like or dislike them all. Okay, so I've now liked or disliked all my cats, and I'm going to upload a cat. So I'm going to go to my free cat pics. Grab a cat image. Pexels is my go-to here. And I'm going to find myself an adorable cat picture of some sort. Whoa. Why are these loading so slowly? Yeah, this will be Moon. So copy image address. I'm going to put my image address in here, and I'm going to call this cat Moon, and I'm going to upload the cat. Now, I can see the cat came back. I'm console logging my response, by the way, on submission. So if we look at my form, on submit, I have a console log. So I know the cat is coming through. It has an ID. It was persisted. But notice that it did not show up into my empty container. And I know it should have into my sort of next up container. I know it should have because my next up container is currently empty and this thing has a status of undecided. If I refresh the page and I look at, if I use React DevTools to examine this thing, whichever, I look at app and I look at my state of cats and I look at the last one, it is in fact, whoa, it is in fact Moon. So it was persisted. I'm not going to click through like and dislike all the way to see it again, but it's there. We can see it there. So we have an issue here. And so kind of where we're sitting is, just to kind of show the flow here. We start with app. App is our main parent component. App owns the state of all the cats. App owns the action of liking a cat or disliking a cat, whichever we're doing here. This is kind of one trick pony, this particular function. Handles loading the cats, and it handles rendering two cats containers and a center container. The cats containers being liked or disliked. So app is kind of our main guy. So let's kind of watch what happens as we pass down through, for example, center container. So I'm passing a prop of center container and a prop of handle like click. If I look at center container, which is, oops, there. Let's flip this to the right. So it's receiving props, but all it's doing with those props is passing them along. So display cat is simply grabbing the first cat, the next cat in line from this particular prop. We're passing that along. And next up cat, again, is just grabbing a few cats. So I'm also performing no functionality here. There's no on-click, there's no on-submit, there's nothing that's actually happening from this container. It is strictly a middleman. It's strictly passing along these props to display cat to next up cat. It's not passing anything to upload, but it is passing along to these two. So there's like a little ding in my mind, like, wait a minute, this thing does not need access to this information if it doesn't have to have it. So we're already seeing an advantage here where I don't need something to be just sort of passed along through. Excuse me. So let's see where this thing is going, for example, with display cat. So I'll split that to the right and tell me if this gets too hard to read. Here's display cat, which is taking cat and handle like click. And here's where we're actually using handle like click as an on-click, whether we're liking or disliking something. And so it's being used as well as the cat that we're peeling off from our props. So we can see a little bit of this kind of through action happening. In order for our form here, I'm going to get rid of everything else. Well, no, I wanted app there. Sorry. So in order for the form, though, to work and to actually update our cats, what I'm going to need to do right now in terms of React is I'm going to need to pass some sort of a handler function from app down to center container, from center container down to upload form. And that's going to have to be like some sort of a callback that will get triggered or called once my new cat comes through. And I'll have to create a new function, a new method up here called like handle new cat. So again, we can see this interaction that's spread across my application. So this is where Redux is going to be useful. So in order to apply Redux, first I need to kind of get it set up. So does anyone want to help me? Where should I look to think about setting up my Redux? Anybody? Create a folder. Okay, I could create a folder. And creating folders is not a bad idea, right? A folder could have like my actions and my reducers and that kind of thing in it. Yeah, I think, and I think that's a good idea. A folder called reducers and a folder called actions. Before we even do that, what I'd rather do, I think, is put everything in one place. That way we can visualize it. I think that would help with visualization. Then once we have it all working, we'll pull things apart and import and export into folders for organization's sake. But I think for visual sake, let's put things in one place and then we'll break them apart. Because sometimes, and the reason I think that's a good idea is sometimes when you're using Redux, especially for the first time, or when you haven't gotten deep into it, it almost seems like, where did that go? Where was that action? Where did it come from? Where is it going? And so if we put them all in one place, at least for the time being, we can see everything that's happening, and then we can kind of distribute into different folders and start exporting and importing, which would definitely be a better idea. So Babs, your idea is spot on, but I think we're going to start in one place, and that one place is going to be index.js. Why do I target this file? Why is this an important file? Anyone?
This is the one that calls app, and we
Yes.
want to put app in a provider.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So I need to wrap app and provider. In fact, because I know I need to do that, I need to import provider. So there's a number of imports that I need here. Do we remember which library provider comes from? And just for reference, we have Redux, React Redux, Redux Thunk.
React Redux.
And yes, it is React Redux. Nadia is correct, and I think Daniel who said that are correct. So I feel like I'm missing one. We have, whoops, let's just kind of create some space here. The libraries that we have to choose from are Redux, React Redux, Redux Thunk. I think I'm missing one, but for now it's good enough, I guess.
React.
Well, React I already have. So I should say Redux libraries.
Oh, sorry.
Nope, that's okay. You're absolutely right. We definitely need React, but we have that already. Cool. So what else do I need? I need Thunk. So Babs, are you asking what Thunk is when you see that? Or are you? Oh, you're telling me I need Thunk. Thunk is the asynchronous. In fact, it's sort of the answer to somebody's previous question about asynchronicity. Thunk is the tool we're going to use to be able to send asynchronous actions. So what else do we need? We need provider from React Redux. What do we need from just React? I'm sorry, from just Redux. What things do we need from Redux by itself?
Connect.
What else? Do I need connect here?
Create store.
I need create store for sure.
Connect would be in the components, I think.
Yeah, so connect is exactly right, Kevin. Connect, I need any component that's going to be hooked up to state or to the actions that describe changes in state. I would import connect. I don't need them for my parent where I'm wrapping provider. But it certainly is a good thought. Create store, what else? I can do it this way too, by the way. For readability's sake, I can break this up into different lines. What else do we need? Is that all I need? Maybe that's all I need. Let's try it. So I've got create store, and how do I need to build, I know I need to build a store. I know I need a reducer, so my ingredients here are reducers, store, actions, and who knows what else, or action creators maybe. So let's think about at least what the very minimum that we need to get some sort of a Redux store going. And what do we need? Any thoughts? Apply middleware, that's a good one. Okay, apply middleware, which gives us a couple things. First of all, without apply middleware, we wouldn't have our awesome dev tools, which I think are invaluable. We also wouldn't be able to use Thunk. So apply middleware is definitely a necessity. I could call Nadia. So we know we need a reducer. And I know that's going to be a function. So I'm just going to say const reducer for now is just an empty function. Okay. Of course, this won't work, but I know at least trying to get this thing put together for now. Let's think about a reducer. We need to build a store, right? Const store. And I know I'm going to use create store to build my store. And then we have to figure out like what in the world gets passed into create store. And it's not like you have to memorize these things, right? We can certainly look and try and figure out redux.js.org. Like, how do I build a store? Maybe I just Google it. How do I build my Redux store? I wonder what kind of resources will come up. Create store. Okay, this looks good. Reducer, preloaded state, and enhancer. Okay, that's interesting. The square brackets, by the way, does anyone know what those mean?
Optional.
Yes, they mean optional. Nice job. So a lot of times in JavaScript documentation, your brackets, which look like array brackets, just mean optional arguments. So we at least need a reducer. So let's start with that. And I already have one, even though it's not going to work yet. So I have a reducer. So let's now, what's that final step? And I think it was Sarah that mentioned it. What did you say I have to do?
Not
Add
sure.
provider, yeah. And what single prop does provider absolutely need?
It needs a store.
It needs store. Yep. And the store needs to be built using Redux's create store. So let's see if we've met the bare minimum requirements yet. So I have a const store. I have a reducer function, even though it's total garbage as of yet. So let's see if we save this. Did we break? What did we break? Let's find out. Okay, great. Unterminated JSX contents. All right, so that's probably just a no, let's see. Thank you, thank you. I corrected it the wrong way. Okay. Let's see what happens now. Connecting to React, that's maybe good news. Hey, look at that. This thing's working. Okay, so somehow something seemed to have either worked or everything utterly failed. So the sort of one of the keys is going to be, do I have my Redux dev tools? It says no store found, make sure to follow the instructions. What happens if I click on that? I go to GitHub Zalmoxis Redux DevTools extension. So let's see. Okay, so it looks like I need this thing passed in as an argument. So let's try that. I'm just going to copy what I see from the documentation there. And it looks like that was the second argument after my reducers. So I'm going to save that and see what happens. Hey, look at that. This is awesome. Okay, so now I have my Redux dev tools and I can look at my state, which is undefined. Now, why would my state be undefined? And what is add init? What's going on here?
Initial value.
So add init, can anyone tell me exactly what add init is, or at least like give me a shot? Initial value. So what we're seeing here is the initial value of the store, Sarah. That's right.
Right, but what we want to do is when we run it through the switch, and if it doesn't match any of them, so it's going to get the default value.
Good, that's exactly right. And add and init should not match any of your explicitly defined actions. And notice that if I click on action, I can see that there was an action fired called add at init. And as Sarah mentioned, she mentioned switch statements. So let's actually start to build out this reducer. What does the reducer, and we talked about this a little bit, and it's okay if you remember, if you don't remember. What does reducer need to receive as arguments? Let's start there. Anyone?
An action.
It does need an action. What else? What's the first argument it needs?
State, the existing state.
That's right, state and action. Okay. And basically I need to, you mentioned a switch, and there's a question right now, which is, does add at init come as default without your having to add it to the code? Yes, it does. So add at init is Redux's way of going through your reducers and getting your initial state before anything has even like finished rendering. Okay, so add at init is the name of the action, the type of action I should say, carries no payload. It just returns like your initial state, which is why it's important that I set a default state. So what do I want my state to look like? And let's start simple. Within the entire application, what's like the one really, really, really important thing I need? Like if we start with app, in terms of data, what data do I really need like almost right away?
The store, the state.
Yeah, so I guess, so I have several bits of state sprinkled throughout my application right now, but the main one that I'm sort of talking about or trying to point at is cats. I need my array of cats, right? Nothing's going to work without cats. So how can I now, and I know that these are getting sort of passed around all over the place, so I know let's pull this into from where it lives as a property, or I should say as a piece of state within the app component. Let's pull this out into Redux. So if I want cats to be a piece of state, what does this need to look like? It's a tricky question, actually.
Well, I know with the reducer, you have to start with the switch statement and then in parentheses action.type.
So that's true. That's definitely true. So I'm going to switch on action.type. Okay. And then I'm just going to set up case something or another, return. This should be indented, right? I'm just going to kind of set up like a very basic. And this whole thing needs to be wrapped in curlies, right? So I think I have I always have to look up my my switch statement. Case, what's this going to be? Okay, so what am I missing on line 16? Yes, my initial state. So my initial state, and I'm gonna borrow from what Nadia pasted in there. I want to make sure to set my initial state to be a cats array. So let's try it both ways. It looks like here we see an object pointing to an empty array. So let's start there. Let's see what happens. Oh, by the way, we're just going to say this is currently bogus because there's nothing here yet. I don't have anything going on yet. Return state. So really, let's not even have our case yet because we really have no cases yet. We don't have any actions defined yet. So now let's look and see what happens. Yes, of course, it didn't like that I wrote bogus, but it should be updating here. Okay, great. So let's see what now our current Redux state is. Hey, look at this. So we have an array of cats. That's awesome. This is good news, I think. What happens if what would happen if I did this? What if I just said state equals an empty array? Let's see what happens now. Okay, what is my state? It doesn't like that at all, right? Notice that something's wrong here. My initial state needs, in this case, why does it need to be an object? It doesn't always need to be an object, right? In a lot of your reducers, it may not be an object. It might be an array. But why does it have to be an object right now? Why does this have to be an object? Currently, the way that I have this set up right now. And the reason is because right now I only have one reducer. I have one reducer alone, and I'm passing that to my store and I can kind of, I don't know if this will be easier to read or not, but we can do it this way. Okay, so I don't know if that's easier to read or not, but you can see that when I create my store using create store, the function I get from Redux, I'm simply passing one reducer. If I were using combined reducers, then I could have a reducer to represent any given piece of the state tree, and I will call the reducer by the name of whatever I want to name the property. But because right now I only have one reducer, I'm not using combined reducers, that reducer actually needs to return a state object that looks appropriate, meaning it's an object with all its properties in it. So right now I've got my cats array, it starts off empty. So what I can do now, a couple things I could do. Like now we kind of have to think about how can I actually then take this particular piece of state away from app and point it to Redux and use Redux instead? How can I do that? Any ideas? I want to do this in 2 steps because we still really need to get our cats from the database, right? We have a Rails server up and running. We're no longer going to be fetching inside of componented mount, at least not directly this way. We're not going to fetch and then use set state. Instead, I'm going to describe an action, and I'm going to use my connect function to pull that action into app or wherever I need it to get the cats that I need. In fact, I might not even need to do it inside of app at all. Who knows? We'll see. So what that means is I need to start thinking about some actions that I need to define. And we could start with something really, really simple. I could start by creating an action called const. Let's just call it. So I am going to use map state to props, but first, before I can use map state to props, I need some state actually living in my Redux store, which right now there's nothing, right? I have an empty array. So I'm going to call, this is going to be a little bit of a fake out at first. Not a fake out, it's going to be fake at first, but but hopefully we'll see the idea. So I'm going to call get cats as an action. And what it's going to do is be, so get cats, it's going to be simply a plain old JavaScript object right now. And it's going to be type get cats with a payload, I'll just say cats. And I'm going to steal a little bit of information back from my backend. So where's that? I tucked it away, didn't I? It's right there. Cool. So I'm going to steal some of this stuff, just a couple cats, just like 2 or 3. Like those guys, maybe these 3. So I'm going to steal this information to mock my fetch request. And the reason I'm doing that is to work very, very slowly, kind of one step at a time. How did this get out of order again? I don't understand why that happens. I want Chrome over here. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to just say const cats equals an array of cats. Okay. Oops. All right, so what I'm going to do is say cats are cats. And so now I have an action. So I know that when component mounts, I want to fire that action. Okay, so right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what app was doing, and I'm going to get rid of this stuff here so we can see it all together. So I'm going to split app to the right. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this fetch request. I'll just comment it out. And instead, I want to fire off the get cats action. Okay. So in order to fire it, I need it. I need to have it. So what I could do, like, I could actually just take this thing, put it up. Oh, no, let's see how I want to demonstrate this. Basically, what I want to be able to do is this. I want to be able to say this dot props dot get cats. Okay. And I need this action available. So let me put that back here. I need this action available right now. I don't have it, right? So what I could do is I could export this thing, and I could import that action from here. Import get cats. Where are we here? We're inside of app. App needs to reach in the same folder into index. Okay, and so I'm importing my action, and then what I need to do is basically fire it. So what if I can I just say get cats like this? Is that going to work? And so now we're going to start seeing some problems. This dot props like get cat. Okay, it's still loading up here. And the idea is like, component did mount, get cats, object is not a function. There's a major problem here, right? Something's not working. So basically what I'm trying to show is like, I need somehow to get this action here into my component did mount and invoke it from component did mount. Babs, I think it was, mentioned using folders, and we are going to break our actions into folders for sure. I'm just trying to show them kind of all together right now. So right now this is an action itself, like it's a raw JavaScript. It's just a raw, how do I want to say? It's just a plain old JavaScript object. Sorry, words escaped me there for just a minute. So what if I do this? What if I decide that I want this action to be available to this app component? I'm no longer going to be calling set state in component. Instead, I want to actually update the state of my Redux application. So what that means is I need to import a couple other things here. I need connect. Oops. And where does connect come from? Is it from Redux, React Redux, or Redux Thunk? It's from React Redux, that's right. So I'm going to import my action. And then down here, I'm going to map dispatch to props. So I'm going to say const map dispatch to props. This is going to be a function that takes in state as an argument. Oops. So we're going to use our good old, oops. We're going to use our good old Redux dev tools. Like if I'm not sure, Redux documentation. If I'm not sure how to use this thing, I can go look it up. So what is map dispatch to props? Map dispatch to props. Okay. Where is my actual map dispatch to props? Nope. Why can't I see the actual definition? I want to see the Redux map dispatch. I haven't figured out the key to how to get the actual source method signature to show up within the documentation. I don't like that it's like giving me these random questions. I want to see the actual method signature, which there isn't properly one, but there should be at least examples. Okay, here we go. So maybe. Two forms of map states props. Okay, here we go. So here are the examples that I wanted to find. Const map state, map dispatch to props. So we're receiving dispatch as an argument, excuse me. State would be our argument if we're on map state to props. So dispatch is going to be our argument. And what we're returning is an object which describes the behaviors that we want to be accessible as props to our particular component. And so basically what I want to do is I want to be able to get cats. And so I'm going to take this example. I'm going to look at it for a moment. And I feel like I'm going to grab it. I'm going to put this here for reference. Basically, I need a function that looks something like this. I'm going to return what appears to be an object. And inside this object, I need to describe what I need. I need to get cats. And this looks like it needs to be a function using dispatch, which is going to be an incoming argument. And I'm going to dispatch the action I'm looking for, which I've already imported here, called get cats. Okay. So now how do I actually then use this thing? First, I'm going to comment out my example there for reference. What I'm going to export instead of just app, I'm going to use connect. And I'm going to pass in, I have up to 4 things I could pass in. So this would be my map state to props, map dispatch to props, and then a couple of other options that we're not even going to talk about today or tomorrow. These are the 2 we're concerned with. I don't need any state right now, or at least not yet. So I'm going to call null, or at least I haven't decided that I need state. But I do need this action map dispatch to props. And I've just built this function. And all I've done is I've looked at the redux documentation. I've grabbed an example. I'm trying to sort of pattern match and see if I can get this thing to work. Map dispatch to props. If I save that, and I save this, let's see what happens. Let's see what we broke now. Okay, if I look at my state, this thing still is thinking. Okay, object is not a function, blah, 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 blah. Component to mount get props. Oh, so what this does, map dispatch to props. It gives me whatever I call this thing will now be available as props. So here I'm calling it get cats. And actually I need to, yep. So I'm dispatching, this get cats, by the way, the reference, just to be clear, this get cats is what I'm importing up here. Whereas this get cats is the name of the property, and that's what I need to invoke now. So this dot props dot get cats. Let's see what happens now. Okay, something is happening. So I look at my state under get cats, and it looks like nothing seems to have happened. But I can look at this thing, and I can look at, wait a minute, state action. So it looks like this particular action seems to give us the cats that we're looking for, but my state tree is not updated the way that I want it to. So this is interesting, right? So now what I'm seeing is, like, I've fired off this action. This particular action gave me cats, the three cats that I grabbed, as a matter of fact. But something doesn't quite feel right yet. So what we're going to do is kind of start to move this toward what it's actually going to look like. I'm going to delete this thing. What I just deleted was my fetch request. Actually, I don't want to delete that. I'm going to use that later. So here's what, I don't know if that was a great example. What I'm trying to do is show us, like, how could we use this, although it's not a great pattern right so far. Basically, I just need to fire, I've built an action, and I've imported that action, and I've described the action with map state to props. I've used connect to make this function, this action available to be able to dispatch it as this dot props dot the name of the action. But this still doesn't like really feel good. So what let's do, let's actually start organizing this a little better. I wanted to put everything kind of together first. Now let's think about breaking this thing up. So let's create a new folder, not a file. New folder called actions. A new folder called reducers. And this action isn't really going to be quite enough. What I'm going to end up building are what we call action creators. And so what I'm going to do is let's start with an action creator, and we're going to start a little bit complicated, I suppose, because we really need thunk here. We need to be able to send an asynchronous action. So let's think about what we need in order to do that. First of all, I need thunk itself. Okay. Oh, did I have that wrong in the Daniel's saying I had something wrong there. Type get cats. Oh, no. And the reason, Daniel, is because I actually grabbed get cats itself from over here. So this is what I'm actually passing to dispatch. I just defined it over here. I could have, so what I could do instead, like maybe this would make more sense. If I get rid of this export entirely, and instead of importing it, basically what I had was this, right? These are approximately equivalent. I basically had a const called get cats, which has a type and a payload. And I would just have to take this cats and put it over here as well, so it would be available, right? So this is effectively what I had going on, and that's why I was trying to point out. I know it's confusing. Let me just kind of make this more clear. I can call this anything I want. Get cats action now as props, and so what I'm dispatching is this particular action that I created. So that's a good question, and so I can see how that was confusing with this example. So now, because I've named the property get cats action now as props, this is what I would invoke now instead of get cats. It's now, this is the name, this is the action that I'm actually dispatching right here. Good question, great question. But we're still gonna kind of undo all of this to some extent. And we're gonna kind of we're gonna take a step back, and we're going to go back toward like something a little bit more conventional and a little bit more normal. So I definitely need thunk, which is from redux thunk, import thunk from redux thunk. Okay, and in order to be able to use thunk, I actually need to include that in my create store. And there's a couple things I can do. Let's just see if this works. I don't think it will. Apply middleware, and I can pass in thunk. I think we're going to see an error on this, though. We'll see. We might see a couple errors because I just kind of broke everything inside of here. So let's get rid of that for a moment. Get rid of this for a moment. We're going to rebuild all of this, so don't worry. I'm going to comment this out for now and just export default app again. I'm going to take a step back. And now let's see what's happening. Okay, it seems to be loading, maybe. Okay, so I get this error. It looks like you're passing several store enhancers to create store. It's not supported. It was supported on an older version of Redux, and it's no longer. So let's see what happens if I Google this error. And I don't know if you can tell the color difference, but I've clicked on this link many times. This is just a newer syntax now that Redux is requiring for using create store. There's a nice description here of how it used to look, and how it needs to look now is kind of the very first, which is a really nice answer. Basically, we now need to import another tool from Redux called compose, and we need to build a compose enhancer function, which is either windowed, which is, I mean, we can simply copy paste this. This is safe enough. We can copy paste. Effectively, though, compose enhancer is going to be a function, and we're going to use it to apply middleware. So here's what that's going to look like, and I can literally copy paste this. So I'm going to do that. Let's do it here. So I'm going to get rid of this. No, I'm not. This is create store. So now what's going to change here? Let's see. Basically, my store will no longer be this guy. And instead, my store will be this guy, which I actually need then to call currently below my reducer so that it's available. And it's just reducer still. Don't have any actions yet. Okay. let's see if we got this right. So I've got my compose enhancer function, and I'm now using it. I'm passing apply middleware, and I'm passing along thunk as an argument. Let's see what that did for us. Whoops, if anything. Compose is not defined. That's because I need to import it from Redux. Okay. So now this seems to be working, or maybe. I've got an undefined state though. Let's see what happened. Reducer, state, cats, action, blah, blah, blah. Why did we get an undefined? Oh, there it is. Okay, so we got our empty array. This is good news. So now what I'd like to do is take this reducer and kind of get it out of here. And what I'm going to do is declare a file, and I'm going to call the file cats. I'm going to call the file cats.js, and I'm going to take my reducer, sorry, this guy. I'm going to cut it out of here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to export this thing. And no longer am I going to export a const, or am I going to name it here. I'm simply going to export this function. It's an arrow function, right? It's an arrow function, has a state, and I can now, instead of an object with a property, I can now slim this down to just an array. And the reason I can do that is I'm now going to use a tool called combine reducers. I'm going to pass in, I'm going to import, and then pass in that reducer. So import, I'm going to call it cats from this file here, which is same level into reducers and down into cats. So /reducers/cats. Okay, so I'm naming this thing, even though it's not named as an export here. And combine reducers is not defined. That's because I haven't imported it yet. So that's another tool coming from Redux, combine reducers. Okay, so that's now defined. And it's actually going to be probably more conventional to say const reducers, something like this, equals, and then I'm going to call combine reducers. And I'm going to pass in my reducers one by one. So then this will simply be reducers. And let's see what it says now. Unexpected token, export default. Okay. Great, so state is not defined. Where is that? That is on reducers cats line 5, return state. Perfect, return cats. And now it's compiled. And if we look in our Redux dev tools, cannot convert undefined or null into an object. Okay. Oh, duh. So I haven't listed cats. Now here what I'm doing is I'm kind of taking a little bit of a shortcut in terms of syntactic convention. You don't have to follow this. You can be a little bit more explicit. You can name your exports if you want. What I've done is I've exported default an anonymous function. When I import that function, I'm giving it a name. Because it's the default export from this particular file, I can do that. So I'm saying name the export default cats, which gives me a variable called cats. And that thing is now pointing to whatever is actually being exported from this file by default. That is simply a function. It's a function that takes in, as you can expect, 2 arguments, the cats array and actions. And I simply return the default at this point because I don't have any other cases. So what I'm doing with combine reducers, I would simply list off any other reducers I have, right? Reducer, other reducer 1, other reducer 2, et cetera, as arguments. And combine reducer will put these things together. And what the nice thing it does, whatever I call these things will become the properties in the store. So let's see what that looks like. Hopefully now I have it working, maybe not. I think I do. Okay, and if we look at our initial state here, state, maybe not, where is our cats, which should be an empty array. Oh, wait, no, yes, no. That's how we set a default argument, right, in JavaScript. Whoops. Well, let's see. Something is screwy here. Let's see what we did wrong. So we're importing cats. Let's just console log cats real quick. Cats. And check out our console. So cats is the what we want it to be. Const reducers. We just simply have cats. That's okay. We should be able to just have one. I shouldn't have to. I should be able to name it this way. So let's print our reducers. And so you will have to be using some mixture of your console and your Redux DevTools and your React DevTools, your Redux DevTools, and your console, sort of all together. So let's see, we are getting cats as the reducer. Whoops, this should be reducers now. You're right, it does have an extra comma. This hanging comma is now, should be allowed in JavaScript. Notice that there was no syntax error. So that should be okay. Reducers, reducers, reducers. Cats is now, I'm invoking combined reducers. Reducers is now this thing. Okay, that looks like the result of something Redux has done. Anybody see what I'm doing here? I don't see the issue off the top of my head. I don't have to call this thing state, do I? I don't think so. Don't believe what I call it matters. Well, I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. Let's see. We're using compose enhancer. I'm declaring my reducers as the result of combined reducers. I know what I'm doing wrong. So what I need to do is actually this, okay, this thing needs to be an object. So combine reducers, what I'm passing here right now is a function. I'm actually surprised I'm not getting an error, but apparently not. So what this needs to be then is an object. And what it needs to look like is this. Now, here is where I'm actually naming my state property. I can use the shortcut in JavaScript and simply say cats this way. Is that right? Yes. And here then is where I would, if I had more reducers, this is the format it would look like. I'm actually passing an object with reducer 2, reducer 3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right now I only have one, and I can use this shortcut. It's the same thing as doing this. Oops, cats, cats, right? Same thing, just a shortcut. This is just ES6 syntax. I'm allowed to do that. It basically says this object has a property called cats whose value is whatever the variable cats is pointing at. And now, maybe, and no guarantees, but there it is. We finally do have our cats array in our state. Sorry about that. Just to demonstrate what I said, if it was confusing, I could say like my cats, right? And I could point it at cats. So the value needs to be the reducer that I'm importing here. This is a function, and I can name it whatever I want. Now I will have a property in the store called my cats rather than just cats. It's still pointing to the same thing. And we'll look here and we'll see the name of the property will change. Now it's called my cats. Sorry about that, a little hiccup there, but that'll happen. Cool. So now I've got my reducer seems to be working, and I immediately decided to tackle sort of one of the harder problems, which is an asynchronous action. So it is 8:05. We're a few minutes past time. If you guys have to go, by all means, run. What I'd like to do is at least get my cats to show up in the state using Redux. That's kind of my goal for the end of this particular session. So I'm going to kind of hang on and get that done rather than just hanging up in the middle of this. If you can hang on, great. If you can't, no problem. It will be posted. So now I've got this reducer. So now this is looking much better because now I've got my reducers being defined using combined reducers. I'm defining my store, and I'm simply wrapping my app in provider with store being passed in. And now I've removed my reducers. I've pushed them out to separate folders. And now let's talk about the actions we need to build. So I'm going to create a new file called cats.js. And inside of cats.js, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating some actions. And I'm going to say actions up here, or action creators. I'm going to separate these into action creators and async action creators. Action creators. Now, what is an action creator, you might ask? An action creator is a function that returns an action. So, for example, I might say an action creator would be export const set cats. And this would be an action creator that receives cats as an argument, which if I'm using an arrow function, I can use the shorthand, and returns, and I do have to wrap this, I'm going to return an object because an action should be an object. I do need to open up the function body, even though this is an arrow function, because if I just try to return an object this way, like with a type, set cats, and a payload of cats. Whoops, I'll just say cats. If I do this, then JavaScript will mistake these curly brackets not for an object, but rather for like the body of the function, and it'll see like these comma separated key value pairs, and life won't be good. So we do actually have to open this up into curly brackets and then use the return keyword. So this is simple enough, I would say, or hopefully. It's simply an arrow function that receives cats as an argument. We can presume this is an array, and returns a type of set cats with a payload of those cats that are sort of shoved in here. So this is what needs to happen, but I need to get these cats. I don't have them yet, and that's where our async action creator comes into play. So what that looks like is I'm going to export const get cats, and here's we're kind of coming full circle here. And what this is going to do is this is going to be a function. So what I'm going to do is say this get cats is going to receive dispatch as an argument. And it's going to return, hold on a second. Is that right? Now I'm questioning my own syntax here. What I'm going to return is a function. Dispatch, a function that has dispatch as an argument. So what this is going to allow me to do, that feels better. So what this is going to allow me to do is take that fetch request that I built and fire it. Where'd it go? There it is. So I'm going to take this fetch request, uncomment, cut, fire it off. And what I'm going to do on my second then, instead of calling this.setState, I'm actually going to dispatch the action that I've set up here, set cats. So what I'm going to do now is simply dispatch an action called set cats. Dispatch set cats and pass in cats. So this is the idea. Basically, Thunk allows me to do this, and we may have to double check our syntax. I always have to do that. By the way, this has to return a fetch. 913 get cat. So name of the const, export const get gets. Thank you. We're going to get our gets. We're going to get gets. Get gets is more fun than getting cats. So the idea is now we have the ability to not just return plain old JavaScript objects like this, but also to return from our action creators functions that receive dispatch as an argument and then return a promise, right? Return, in this case, a fetch request. And so then I can use that dispatch, that incoming argument. This is Redux's dispatch function that allows me to actually trigger a change. So now I can use dispatch to actually set the cats. And notice that I'm using an already defined action creator again and passing in those cats that are coming back from my database. Okay, so let's see. So how is this thing actually going to work now? So first of all, let's fix our reducer, because right now it's not set up properly. So let's say that our case needs to be set cats, right? Because notice that get cats is not making a change to state. Get cats is going to fire off a fetch request sort of on its own. It's not actually going to fire a reducer until we dispatch a separate action. So not all actions are going to sort of, I could do things with this, right? I could do something else in terms of like, maybe I could set up a different action of some sort, but for now, let's just see how this is going to work. So case set cats, what I want to return, whoops. My action is going to be coming in, my action type will be set cats, and what should be returning for my action payload should be cats. So now this particular array will be replaced when this particular reducer gets hit, set cats is triggered. It should be coming in with a payload of cats. So indeed, that's what we're sending here from our set cats. So now get cats is what we still need, and I still need that in my app, which I kind of had already, so maybe I shouldn't have just deleted it. But I'm going to import my action from the component that needs it. This particular export is get cats from where I'm in app, and now I need to go from app over to actions down to cats. From app to actions, cats. And in my componented mount, so first let's get access to this thing as an action, which we kind of already had down here. In fact, I can kind of just comment this back in. So I'm dispatching get cats. That looks good. Okay, I need to then call this guy back in, comment this one back out. This is looking okay. I don't really feel like I need my example anymore. I don't need this hanging comment. And so now when the component mounts, hopefully, if all goes well, we'll see what we broke, I should be able to call this.props.getCats. And so instead of like handling internal state here, I'm not doing anything with this state. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm firing off an action. I'm using map dispatch to props to describe the actions I need, name them, and then fire them off in a particular way. And I'm using connect to then pull that functionality into this component, making it available finally as props to whatever I name my map state to props object properties that are from the object I'm returning. So I'm importing my action. I'm making it available here as props. Let's see what happens. Well, what did I break now? I must have broken something. Okay, unexpected token. What is it? Syntax error coming from line 18 of cats in my actions. All right, return. If anyone sees it, I'm all ears. Maybe one more. I don't need that, do I? Expected an assignment or function expressions, did some expression, no unused expressions on line 18. Line 18 of what? Oh, app.js, okay. Oh, so excuse me. So, pardon me. I changed this from an action to an action creator, which allows it to be much more versatile. In other words, this thing is a function, right? So this is a function, this is a function, What do these things return? They return actions. This one's a plain old JavaScript object. This one is another function, which means getCats is now an action creator rather than an action itself. So I can't just dispatch it this way. Instead, what I need to do, and I'm actually going to show you what I think is a much nicer pattern. Instead of defining a map state to props function, if I have action creators, I can simply pass in an object naming the action creator that represents the action I need to fire. In this case, it's getCats. And hopefully that'll at least clean up part of that issue. Maybe. Failed to compile. Oh, thank you. It said, it told me straight up it was an expression. No, wait. Okay, something is happening. It's thinking. Still failed to compile. setCats is not defined. Okay. That's because it needs to be a string. Okay. Let's see if it's still thinking. It is still thinking. Unexpected token. Okay. Actions, where was that coming from? Always read your errors. Reducers, cats, line 5. Okay, reducers, cats, line 5. Needs a colon. Okay. RTFE, read the full error. Make sure you're always reading your errors in their entirety. Okay, now we have some good news. It looks like when my init fired, I had an empty array of cats in my redux state tree. And now when setCats fired, I ended up with my array of cats, my full array of cats. Why? Because now I imported my action creator, okay, instead of just an action. I used the optional action creator syntax to simply pass an object with my action creator. This is, by the way, again, the same syntax as doing this. These are identical in terms of syntactically speaking. So if I have a variable called getCats, I can simply pass it with no colon, telling this object, you have a property called getCats whose value is the value of getCats. I'm passing it as the second argument to connect because I don't need to connect to state, at least not yet. I'm going to, of course. But in fact, we can kind of finish that up. Well, we're already pretty late. We should probably wrap this up actually for today. But notice that now I've got my getCats. I've got my Redux store set up. So my Redux store is now poised and ready for action. I've got a full load of cats, and I can now start replacing. I no longer need this .state cats at all. And what I can do is search for, run a command F for this .state .cats. And every time I find it, I'm going to replace it with, what did I just do? Okay, I'm going to replace it with this .props.cats. And I'm going to replace that one, replace that one, replace that one, replace that one. And I think that's all of them. And now, so I am going to go through this. We need now a map state to props. So const map state to props, Now what I'm going to do is describe what I need from the store. So what do I need now from the store? I need my cats, right? So what this thing does is it takes in our state as an argument. And what I need to return similarly is an object. So do it this way. And what I need are my cats. And I need state.cats. Now this particular state is the redux state. So this isn't like a state that's local to this component. Notice we don't use the keyword this. This is the state of the Redux store. And so what I'm doing with map state to props, I'm saying, hey Redux, give me the things I need from the store, the actual data. With map dispatch to props or with my optional action creator, action creators as object properties syntax here that I'm using, I'm actually grabbing the actions, the things I can do. So what I'm going to do then is, instead of null, I'm now going to say map state to props. What that should do for me is tie me up to the Redux store and allow access to whatever this property is, in this case, cats, allow that as access now to this particular component as this.props.cats, or in a functional component, just props.cats. So that's why I went through and changed all these. I should have done that second, I guess, but I did it first for whatever reason. And let's see what happens now. There they are. Now I have my cats. So I've now I've transferred, I should say, my state. I no longer need a constructor here at all. I still have a lifecycle method, so this is still a class function. And when my lifecycle method loads, a component did mount, I should say, I'm going to fire off and get all my cats, which now live in redux state rather than in my React state. Now I still have big problems because as soon as I click on one of these things, nothing happens. So I mean, it's not huge problems, but because now I've disconnected, all my set states are no longer going to work because I don't have state anymore. So they're just kind of not doing anything. So that's kind of would be the next step, is let's look at the changes we want to make and how we could persist them to the Redux store. So in summation, or in summary, we've built our store using a combination of tools that come from Redux. We've included thunk so that we can make asynchronous actions. We've declared a single reducer thus far, although we will make more. We've also declared 2 action creator functions, one that returns a plain old JavaScript object once we actually have our cats, one that sends a fetch request and returns a function, which allows us then to manually dispatch once our promise resolves. And what that does is it updates our store. And so we can see what our store will look like, by the way, when we use combined reducers, simply by the object that we're passing. And so right now we just have cats. Nadia asks an excellent question. Where did the dispatch argument come from in the action creators, right? Is it a prop of the store? And it is a prop of store. Yes, it is. So are you talking about, so you said in the action creators, so you're talking about right here? Right here? Right, this guy right there. So get cats. We import it into app. All we're importing is this function. It's an arrow function. It's a function that returns another function. Because I have thunk, I'm allowed to do that. When I'm line 61, what I'm passing this thing to connect, Redux is receiving this on the other end. And Redux basically will treat this as a callback that it knows how to invoke. And when it invokes it, it will supply dispatch appropriately. So we're giving this thing back to Redux. We're pulling it from where we defined it. We hand it to Redux in the connect function. And we say, here, Redux, this is the function that represents the action I need to fire, whether it's a plain old JavaScript object or whether it's a function. And Redux, as long as I have thunk, Redux knows how to handle either one. And Redux will turn around and invoke it. Similarly, a similar question, Nadia, would be, how did this thing ever get dispatched? Because we never actually say dispatch and then this particular action. Again, Redux is taking care of that for us. Redux knows when and how to dispatch that once it gets fired. So Redux is kind of working in the background and taking your functions as callbacks, whatever you describe. Does that make sense? Cool. Awesome. Great question. Great question. Okay. It is time. I'm going to call it. It's been almost 2 hours. Thank you all for hanging on. Those of you who are still here, which is most of you. I can't believe I didn't put any of you to sleep. But thank you for sticking around. Any questions before I stop the recording? Okay.